stuff works. So that's coming. Okay. How was your week? Actually, my week started out awesome. Every year on my birthday, the biggest thing, the things that I like to do, that I want to do, I like to have lobster, and my favorite cake is a Boston cream pie. And so in Texas, that meant, just kind of making do. Like going to Red Lobster and then going to a bakery or a grocery store, telling them what you want and having them kind of go, huh? And then explaining it to them and whatever. But here, I realized this is the opportunity to get it where it's medicinally pure. Like on both of those, like laboratory quality lobster and the place where Boston cream pie, my goodness, was invented. And so this is what we did. We went to Martha's Vineyard, where my wife and I had our honeymoon 26 years ago, and we brought the kids. And you might say, well, why would you go to Martha's Vineyard? It's winter, it's cold. Yes, it's cold, but it was also empty. There was no one there. We were on the beach by ourselves. Not like doing beach things. We were just kind of walking around all, chilling, whatever, and quite bundled up. But it was incredible. And yes, I had lobster. I had it more than once, and so did my kids. And we just had a really good time. I came back, stopped in Boston, where my amazing wife had ordered a Boston cream pie from a bakery in Boston. So we stopped, we walked around Boston a little bit. We did like the first 2 stops on the Freedom Trail, which meant we walked through Boston Common and got to experience all of the sights and sounds and smells that are now a part of Boston Common. Picked up the Boston cream pie, and we're heading home. And I say, you know what? We have to stop at Lowe's in Concord because I need pellets for my pellet smoker because I'm going to use it this week. I've got ribs in my freezer, and I don't have enough pellets to cook in this cold, so I need more. But that's okay. It's not going to take very long. In fact, the 3 of you, you don't even need to get out of the car. I'm just going to go in, I'm going to get this 1 bag, and I'll be right out. 10 minutes, tops. And I go in. I even know where to go in Lowe's. I've never been in this Lowe's before, but they're all laid out the same. So I know exactly where it is. I go, and I get it, and I'm carrying it. And I go to pay for it. And just like Home Depot, basically nobody runs checkouts anymore. It's all self-checkout. Did that. I put the bag right where you're supposed to put stuff after you've paid for it, because otherwise you're going to get a beep that tells you, you didn't put it in the bagging area. Put it in the bagging area. Okay, fine. So I did that. I'm just going to now pick it up, and I'm going to leave. The nice thing about being able to do this from up here is I now don't have to tell this story 20 times. Okay? So I'm holding it, and as I'm stepping, like if this is the self-checkout thing, and this is the place where the bag goes, I stepped like this. And so my knee hit the place where you're supposed to put the stuff you've just bought. And that made me stumble. And it's so weird how there are things that happen so quickly, but in your mind, they slow down. So I'm stumbling, and it hits me, I'm going to fall. And I've got this 30-pound bag of wood pellets in my arm. And it didn't occur to me to fling them or something. So I go down. And people ask, well, what side did you hit on? I really didn't hit on a side. I just kind of fell flat. Now, having the pellets here, I think meant that the order probably was my knee, chest, and then head. And my knee kind of hurts, but it's fine. I'm pretty sure I cracked a rib from where my arm just kind of flattened into my chest. And I do still remember the sound of my head hitting. I actually heard like a crunch sound, and my first thought was, I've just shattered my glasses. But then I realized I'm not wearing my glasses. And so maybe that was my head. But in retrospect, I think it was the pellets. So that's good. You can tell when you're getting older by how people around you react to a fall. Like when kids fall, "Aw, are you okay?" And we even use that little voice because we don't want them to panic. Is everything okay? When someone older falls, like time stops and the crowd surrounds and you can hear like the collective gasp of people around you. And sure enough, like moths to flame, don't move, don't move, don't move. And I'm laying there and I'm just thinking, gosh, this evening has just changed. And what else has changed? Like, is there something really wrong with my head? I don't know. I asked a guy who had a phone, because everybody has a phone, can you show me me? Like, can you turn the camera on so I can look at my face? And you'd have thought that someone implanted a golf ball underneath my forehead. I'm going through every factoid I can think of in my brain. When were my kids born? When was my anniversary? What are their names? What's my name? All that kind of stuff. Did you ever lose consciousness? Don't think so. I think they were feeling like I might be feeling litigious. And so they called a paramedic, which meant the fire truck and the ambulance and 3 firemen lifting me up off the ground and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't know, like, do I go to the hospital? And they go out into the parking lot after I explain what my car looks like to get my wife, so she comes in and she sees me sitting there like this. And the guy said to me, the paramedic, you don't want to go to the hospital tonight. Like, it's busy. You're just going to sit there for a really long time. So tell you what, why don't you go home? Do you live close to a hospital? We don't live far. Okay, if you experience these things, then go to a hospital. But otherwise, don't. And I didn't, so we didn't. Everything's fine until it's not. And it really can change just like that. Something happens. You didn't expect it. And you kind of want to fix it. Like, what do I need to do to know that I can just put this behind me and it's over and I don't have to worry about it anymore? What are my options? Is the best course of action to wait? Would I be making a mistake by waiting? How do you know? These aren't like the ideal set of ingredients in which to make a decision. Like, I don't even know if I'm thinking correctly. I tried to do that, deal where your arm's out and you hit, your finger to your nose. I didn't do this. I tried doing that and I hit my glasses. That's the first time that's ever happened. So what am I supposed to do? When you're not thinking straight, it just complicates everything. There's pressure to solve a problem and maybe just a little bit of frustration that you can't quite make the world do what you want it to do. And believe it or not, this is where we find Naomi in Ruth chapter 3. Clearly, some stuff has happened. And maybe there's a bright side, or there's a silver lining, or there's a little bit of light at the end, not just of this tunnel, but like the end of just this pile of cow dung that has been her life for a while. But can she afford to wait? Is it time to take matters into her own hands? Will it make a difference? The problem that she feels like she's under pressure to solve is Ruth's singleness. In Naomi's mind, there's a clock ticking. That clock is her own life. She doesn't know how much longer she's going to be around. She's older, and she wants to make sure that Ruth is taken care of before she's gone. And now, okay, as chapter 2 ended, the day that Ruth's had gleaning in the fields, this has presented her with a possible solution in the person of Boaz. She sees how generous he has been towards her, and she knows that he is their closest relative, which means this might be an opportunity. What happens when we're under pressure to solve a problem? Particularly when the problem is the result of a trial. Ruth chapter 3. Verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you?" It's interesting to me that security here also means rest, or a resting place. It makes me think of when my kids were young and they woke up having some kind of bad dream and they were scared. And all they wanted was to climb in bed with us. And no matter how bad the nightmare had been, no matter how much they were crying, once we carried them into our room, all of that stopped. And they were able to fall asleep just like that. There's something about security that also leads to rest. Verse 2, now is not Boaz our kinsman, with whose maid you were? Behold, he winnows barley at the threshing floor tonight. Wash yourself, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. It shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies. And you shall go and uncover his feet and lie down. Then he will tell you what you shall do. There's a lot going on here. Okay, so let's unpack it just for a minute. It's the time in the season, the harvesting season, to thresh. The grain has grown. The stalks have been cut. Everything has been gathered. What's left is that now you have to separate the kernels from the husks and the chaff. That means you pile it all in one place and you throw it up into the air, or you thresh it. And if you have chosen a place where wind blows, which they would have done, the wind separates what you don't need from what you do. Just make sure you get it done before the wind dies down. Now, why was there eating and drinking? Because this is a festive time. The hard work is past. Once you have finished the threshing, it's done. Now you're just going to collect the kernels and you're going to use it to feed yourself and your families. They had a bounty, so it's cause to celebrate. Eat, drink, thresh, sleep. What Naomi wants Ruth to do, okay, is look her absolute best when she goes down there. Wash yourself, anoint yourself, put on clothes, the implication being nice clothes. New American Standard says best, literally it just says clothes. But obviously, she's going to wear clothes. So be particular about what you wear is what she means. Don't let it be known you're there. This was not a place where women went. This was a man thing. This was guy time. So don't let it be known that you're around. Wait until he's in a good mood. That's what's meant by wait until he's finished eating and drinking. And make sure you take note of where he lies down. Because there's going to be more than one man present. Boaz is not by himself. And it would be super awkward to greet someone other than Boaz with the way that she is telling Naomi to greet him. She is both direct and open-ended in what she tells Ruth. Go, uncover his feet, lie down, and then he'll tell you what you should do. The implication being whatever he says, go with it. There is some question, okay, as to what's meant by feet. I understand the room we're in, okay, and so understand I'm trying to be sensitive here, but it is questioned whether the author intends a substitution. This would not be the first time that a biblical author makes a substitution rather than a direct reference. Regardless, though, okay, to be clear, Naomi is telling Ruth to make an advance on Boaz. I want you to look your best and make yourself available to him. Think of yourself as a newspaper. See if he wants to buy a subscription. Because her goal is to find security for Ruth. She's looking for a husband for her daughter-in-law. She's not trafficking her, okay? But I think that when we're under pressure to solve a problem, we make choices that we might regret later. When we're under pressure to solve a problem, we make choices we might regret later. There are people who read this as God using Naomi to put Ruth into a position where Boaz will marry her. And I don't disagree, but I think that God is doing it in spite of Naomi and not because of. Because there were a million different ways you could go about this that did not require doing anything in the middle of the night under secrecy in such a way as to say, hey, I'm here. When you find yourself in a place where you're uncomfortable, when you think things have become desperate, we become willing to say things like, the end justifies the means. Options that wouldn't have been considerable or conceivable before become perfectly reasonable now. Please get the overall message of the book of Ruth. Okay, I've said it in a couple of different ways, but I want to put it out here just very explicitly, okay? When everyday despair gives way to extraordinary results by the exercise of ordinary obedience, it's evidence of God's presence. This is the message of Ruth as a whole. The entire book kind of encapsulated in one sentence. When everyday despair gives way to extraordinary results by the exercise of ordinary obedience, it's evidence of God's presence. In other words, when things fall apart and we wonder where God is, what we see is one of the ways in which he shows himself, and it's through the obedience of his people. Not so much in the miraculous, but in the mundane, where it doesn't take a superhero. It just takes obedience. We saw that in chapter 2, namely the value of character, that it inspires kindness. It moves people from pain to praise. In chapter 1, we learned that God will actually use pain to reveal his presence. when people are willing to be God's hand. What chapter 3 teaches us is that we just need to be aware of the potential negative aspects of the events that cause despair. Something goes wrong, it leaves us hurting, but it can also create problems, and then we feel like we're under pressure to solve those problems, and that's a recipe for compromise. And that's what I think we see with Naomi here. I don't believe that she would have told Ruth to do this if she wasn't feeling desperation. And if we can recognize what's happening, if we have that kind of presence of mind, we become less likely to do that which we might later regret. Verse 6. After she said, everything you say, I'll do it. So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came secretly and uncovered his feet and lay down. Folks, you couldn't script this with more suspense if you were trying to create a movie. Like, you can picture her moving around in the darkness, stepping over people who aren't Boaz, and the music starts all soft, and then it starts to build, and we don't know what's about to happen. She watches to see where he lies down. She uncovers his feet, lays down right next to them. Verse 8, and it happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled and bent forward. Okay, so he sits up, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. I think Boaz did better than I might have done. Meaning, if your brain's not ready to see something, what do you see when you open your eyes in the midst of the darkness, okay? All of a sudden, you feel cold where you weren't feeling cold before. And you see this unexpected shape. Like, there was a time, okay, when I made the mistake of watching a movie about a guy in Texas who had an unhealthy obsession with power tools and an inability to work well with people. And I swear that when I woke up at 3 a.m, he was in the middle of my living room. Okay? Boaz did better than me. He knew enough to know that there was a woman at his feet, but he couldn't tell who she was, and so Ruth helps him out. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid." She just gets right to it. "For you are a close relative." We've seen the word maid before, okay? Back towards the beginning of chapter 2, Boaz told her that when she went out to glean, she needed to stay with his maids. But it's actually a different word in Hebrew. In chapter 2, it's referring to young girls. Here, it refers to a servant who was marriable. And that's what she means by spread your covering. Think of it like you're sitting, I don't know, at a football game outside in November or December, and it's cold, and you have a blanket. And someone comes over to you, a woman comes over, and she says, "Can I share that with you?" And in this custom, to share the blanket means we're now getting married. Try it, see what happens. But I don't think it'll mean the same thing today. But that's what she's asking for. What I think the value of the biblical languages is basically that, you know, you can watch something in standard definition. I don't know how many people in here even remember what it was like to watch something that wasn't in HD. And then all of a sudden you see it in HD. Like, I can remember watching a Yankees-Red Sox game. It's in HD. And it's the same thing I saw before. Like there's a manager, he's in the dugout. It's the same thing I could see even in black and white. But now, I feel like I can see dust behind him. And that's what the languages do for us. When she says, spread your covering over me, it is a play, I think deliberately, on something that he said back in chapter 2, verse 12. He said to her, may the Lord reward your work, and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. She says to him, spread your covering over me. In Hebrew, it sounds very, very similar. What she is saying to him is, answer your prayer for me. Please be the answer to your prayer. Take me as your wife. Why? Because he's a close relative. He's a redeemer. She is hoping that he will exercise what's called levirate marriage. If your brother passes away under Israelite law, under the Mosaic law, you are obligated to marry his widow so that you can raise up children for him. Because there was no bigger tragedy in that day and age than having your family go extinct, your family name go extinct. So if there wasn't a brother, you kept going out the branch of the family tree until you find one. And she's saying, you are that person. Part of his response to her is going to be referencing that family tree. But first, he's just kind of blown away. Verse 10. May you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. If you recall from chapter 2, there's the young men who are cutting the stalks. There are the young women who are following them to gather what they cut. It was not uncommon for marriages to come out of that. You spend all this time in the field. You spend all this time getting to know each other. You realize you might be a good match. Your families realize you might be a good match. And so you end up getting married. He said, I can't believe you didn't do that. I can't believe you didn't go after one of them. I can't believe you didn't go after a young man, maybe with more money. Your last kindness, okay, what you did for Naomi in leaving your family behind and following her from Moab to Israel, this beats that. Which I don't think we need to get into, does it really? Like he's using a little bit of hyperbole here to make a point. You have blown me away. Her character has made all the difference. That's what he says in verse 11. Now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask. For all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence. The thing is, though, okay, there's a wrinkle. Boaz is so committed to doing the right thing that he's going to do the right thing. Meaning he's aware, I don't know how, but he's aware that there is a relative closer than him. Someone closer on the family tree than he is. Now, it's true I'm a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I. Like, did they keep a list? Like rankings? You know, almost like a bone marrow registry or something, where one day You might get the equivalent of a phone call. Hey, you don't know me, and you don't know this woman maybe, but something's happened, and you're the next person up. Like, is that how it worked? I don't know. But he was aware that there was someone closer than him. And so he says, remain this night, and when morning comes, if he will redeem you, good, let him redeem you. But if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning. Why? He is so concerned for the reputation that she's built without even trying that he wants to make sure she doesn't ruin it just because she did what Naomi told her to do. So she lay at his feet until morning and rose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor, because he knows what people would think. Again, he said, give me the cloak that is on you and hold it. So she held it, and he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her. Then she went into the city. He is so committed to guaranteeing her security that he basically puts a backpack worth of grain on her. If you remember from chapter 2, what he gave her was about 29 pounds of food. Now it's somewhere between 58 and 95. How does she get that home? Like, how does she hold that over her back and walk however far it is to walk to wherever it is she's living? Sometimes, okay, in Scripture, we get an example to emulate, and it's placed alongside an example to avoid. Not here. What we see with Ruth is a deliberate picture of God's commitment to his people. Boaz says to her, okay, go back up to verse 10. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. That word kindness, okay, that is, if there is such a thing, the key word in Ruth, chesed. God's loyal love, his loving kindness, his loving commitment to you. Ruth is a picture of that, of God's commitment to Israel, of God's commitment to us. His commitment to her commitment to Boaz is meant to mirror that. But it's not like that's not also true of Boaz. Because look at what he does for her. He is taking care of her in every way that he can think of. He is making sure she doesn't just have food, she's got food in abundance. And yes, I will, if this guy isn't closer, or if he doesn't want to take his responsibility, I will alter the entire course of my life for you. I will take you as a wife, knowing that I'm not just taking you into my household, I'm also bringing in Naomi. I will take care of her as well. It's unreal. God is committed to his people. That's what this is supposed to teach us. That's the Lord's intention, I believe, in preserving this story for us. That out of tragedy, God would do something extraordinary, not through the miraculous as we normally understand it, but rather through his people's everyday obedience. Consequently, okay, when we are under pressure to solve a problem, particularly a problem created by some sort of trial, I think we should look for God's loyal love. We should look for God's loving kindness. We need to be aware, okay, that it's possible to make choices we're going to regret because we want to get the problem solved. And trials can make us feel like they have to be solved quickly, like the problem can be bigger than it actually is. But we need to be on the lookout for God's loyal love because it's there. He's just as committed to us as he was to Old Testament Israel. And you could argue, okay, that he's even more committed to us. Because under the Mosaic Law, his blessings, or the absence of his blessings, were determined by the individual's obedience. And really the obedience of the king. And these were really imperfect people. Whereas for us, okay, they are determined by the obedience of Jesus. And his obedience was to the letter perfect, and then given to you as if it was yours. So God is as committed to you as he is to his son. You can't tell me that he's going to turn his back on his son again. He only did it once, and that was when he bore the sins of the entire world. Therefore, he ignores yours because they have been paid for. His justice has been satisfied. So he is as committed to you as he is to Christ. How does this flesh itself out, though, okay, in the life of the Christian? I think anytime you see the following, you see the Lord in action. Justice in the face of unfair treatment. Presence, okay, that fills the absence created by loss. Help when ability is limited. Comfort in the midst of suffering. Forgiveness in the place of guilt. Where am I getting these from? I'm getting them from the book of Ruth. It's not that people were necessarily being unfair to Naomi. She's just experiencing what it means and the ramifications of living in a fallen world. Sin has a way of going scorched earth across the landscape, leaving devastation in its wake. It's like Sherman's march to the sea. You just got nothing but destruction. I'm not sure what fair looks like, but I don't think we would look at Naomi and say that's a picture of fairness. Without Ruth, she would have been utterly alone. They were unable to provide for themselves, but Boaz stepped in and gave them more than they could physically handle. And what I hope I never forget, what I hope you never forget, is that when Naomi came back from Moab in chapter 1, she didn't want to even hear her name because she was convinced that God was furious at her, that he had turned his back on her, or rather set his face against her, that she was the object of his wrath. And then in chapter 2, when she comes home after one day with all this food, she says, "May he be blessed of the Lord who has not withdrawn his kindness to the living and the dead." God showed his commitment to her through the actions of Boaz, and she saw his hand. This has so much to say to us. Just like last week, do we understand that God might use us to answer the prayers of others? Because anytime we do these things, anytime we provide justice, or we provide a physical presence, anytime we provide help or comfort or extend forgiveness, we're not just performing a good deed. We are communicating the love of God to another human being, and that could very well be the first time that they've ever heard it from anybody. Martin Luther was not a perfect man. He said some dumb things. He did some dumb things. But I think he also recovered the faith that had been lost to centuries of corruption. And his comment on the relationship between faith and works, it's worth remembering, especially right now. God does not need our good works, Luther says, but our neighbor does. Christian, we are called to be the hands and feet of God, especially to those who might not be able to grasp what they need or walk to where they can get help. And we encounter more people like that than we ever realize. I pray that we have eyes to see how we can demonstrate God's loyal love. Look at how the chapter ends. It says that when she, Ruth, came to her mother-in-law, she said, Naomi said, "How did it go, my daughter?" And she told her all that the man had done for her. She said, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said, 'Do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" It's like you can hear the thwomp as she takes it off her back and it hits the floor. Somehow she also explained the whole issue with the other relative, and we've got to check with him first. Because Naomi says, "Wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest until he has settled it today." In one sense, this is just ending like the other chapters have ended. Like chapter 1 ended with a bit of a cliffhanger. It's the beginning of the barley harvest. Da, da, da. And then chapter 2 ends with Naomi saying to Ruth, "You know, that guy, he's our closest relative." Da, da, da. And now the third one has ended with, "Hey, there's this other dude out there, and we don't know anything about this dude. We don't know if he's a good dude. We don't know if he's going to be willing to take Ruth as his wife, and we're not really sure that we want that. Like, is this guy going to actually foil what this feels like it's been building to all this time?" What we have to do, because I'm pretty much done, and we're not going to get to chapter 4 until next week, is actually what Naomi and Ruth are forced to do, which I think is what this passage wants to teach us. And that it's that we need to exercise patience. When we're under pressure to solve a problem, okay, it helps to understand that we might make decisions that we would regret later. We should be on the lookout for God's loyal love. And lastly, we need to exercise patience. Why? Because patience leaves room for the Lord to work. I don't know if Ruth and Naomi had much choice in the matter, but what was left for them to do was wait. And there are so many times when that is the place we need to be. Exercise patience. Waiting is hard. Like, it's ironic because on the one hand, the easiest thing to do is nothing. But when you really feel like there's something that needs to be done, golly, it's really hard to wait. To be sure, God's going to be okay, either way. Yes, exercising patience leaves the Lord room to work. But if he needs room to work, he can create room for him to work. He can insert himself. He can press pause on things. How many situations have we seen in our own lives, in the stories of Scripture, when waiting would have been better? Abraham was promised a son. He didn't want to wait, though, and his wife didn't want to wait. And so the result is a conflict that we still deal with today. Rebekah was told that Jacob would receive the benefits of the firstborn, but she didn't want to wait. And because she didn't want to wait, she ended up with a situation where she never saw her son alive again. Satan's temptation of Jesus was, you don't have to wait. You can have it right now. Exercise patience. If there's something to be learned from this book, it's when everyday despair gives way to extraordinary results as the result of everyday obedience. When that happens, it's evidence of God's presence. It's evidence that his hand is at work. And really, when God is working, so many times the best choice is to do nothing. It's to exercise patience. It takes wisdom, and we should listen to other people than just ourselves. But how many times is patience the best way to go? This morning,